and you know, we will possibly give you some questions as we go as well. So, so thank you. Go.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so as Phil said, this session is titled Boosting Power BI Productivity with Tabular Editor, and that's sort of the main focus of this. So my assumption is that all of you are familiar with Power BI, especially Power BI Desktop, and that you've started working with it, and that you have some experience, you know, pulling in data from various sources, mashing them up, creating relationships, creating measures, that kind of stuff. But what I'm going to show you today is that now we can actually start to do some of this stuff in another tool, and that may have some advantages in certain scenarios, and that's hopefully what I'm going to show you today. So first of all, a little bit about myself. My name is Daniel, as already said. I work as a principal BI architect at a Danish consulting company called Kapacity. I've been a Microsoft Data Platform MVP for a little over a year, and working with the Microsoft BI stack for 12 years, and also doing some C# .NET programming on the side for a little over 15 years. As Phil said, I'm the author of Tabular Editor. It's this open source program that you can just go and download on GitHub. It's completely free of charge. And as of last year, I also got involved in something called the Power BI Contributor Program, where if you have noticed the new external tools ribbon pop up in Power BI Desktop, that's actually my creation. My involvement with the Power BI Contributor Program was to create this new ribbon interface on Power BI Desktop. So, what exactly is Tabular Editor? I only have just a few slides I want to show you. The rest of the session will just be one big demo. So hopefully you will like that. But Tabular Editor is this offline editor, and actually it started 4 years ago as an editor for something called SQL Server 2016 Analysis Services. Today we also have something called Azure Analysis Services Tabular Models. And this is actually the product that Tabular Editor was originally intended for. Basically, the story is that Microsoft provides this standard tool for working with Analysis Services Tabular Models called SQL Server Data Tools. It actually looks and feels just like Visual Studio. And the problem with that tool is that if you're working on a large model, very complex model with hundreds of tables, thousands of measures, which is not uncommon when you're doing professional tabular modeling for analysis services, well, then the tool sort of starts to slow down a bit. So whenever you're making changes to a measure, for example, changing a format string or a display folder or stuff like that, the tool just overall starts to slow down, and as a tabular model developer, you just get an experience which is not always ideal. And so that is why I created Tabular Editor 4 years ago, basically as an offline alternative. And what I mean by offline is that Tabular Editor only considers the model metadata and not the data itself. So Tabular Editor doesn't have any features to actually show you the data within your data model. It can only show you the metadata, and the metadata in this case being all of the tables that you have, the columns in each tables, measures, calculated tables, and so on. I think that's about what I wanted to say about this slide. And as of July this year, we can actually use Tabular Editor together with Power BI Desktop for an altogether improved experience. So today we have support for editing various elements of the Power BI Desktop data model directly with Tabular Editor, and these elements are measures, calculation groups, and perspectives. And the funny thing about calculation groups and perspectives is that there are actually no other way to create these objects in Power BI Desktop today. So if you want to add calculation groups to a model or perspectives, then you would have to use Tabular Editor or some other external tool in order to do that. I listed metadata translations here as well. They are not officially supported, but they actually work except for a very, very limited corner case that I will get into in more details later on. If you are using Power BI dedicated capacity, that would be either Power BI Premium or Power BI embedded SKUs, we also have full support for editing all aspects of the data model through the XMLA read-write endpoint. Just be aware that if you decide to make changes to your data model once it's already been published to the service through the XMLA endpoint, then you won't be able to download the PBIX file after you do that. So later, and unfortunately I don't know when, but we do expect that we will have support for editing other data modeling features later on. So hopefully at some point you'll be able to create your entire data model using only Tabular Editor if that's what you prefer. External tools, this new integration that's available in Power BI Desktop, where the external tools ribbon pop up and tools like Tabular Editor and DAX Studio, LM Toolkit, and so on appear, is still a preview feature. So before you make any changes to your model through a tool like Tabular Editor, make sure that you keep a backup of your PBIX file just in case. All right. Any questions thus far? At any point during the demo, feel free to break in. I can see you guys on my phone here right next to me, so you can also just raise your hand or something like that if there's any question. Yeah.
Don't worry, I'm sure people ask some questions.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so just one last slide here. Why would people prefer to use Tabular Editor? Well, it addresses some of the shortcomings of the standard tooling, and you'll see in a little bit what these shortcomings are. So I mentioned earlier that if you are working on a large model, it can take some time for the interface to update if you make a change to a DAX expression on a measure, for example. So that's one thing. There are many other good reasons to use Tabular Editor. I'll show you some of them in the demo. Tabular Editor has a nice interface for editing translations and perspectives and to basically test what the results of these translations and perspectives would look like. I call it a what you see is what you get experience. In that Tabular Editor sort of always presents the model metadata in a way that in the same way that it would appear to the end user. This is not as much a problem when comparing to Power BI Desktop, because the field list, I mean, that the field list kind of always just looks like the way the end users would see the field list. But actually, back in the days of Analysis Services Tabular modeling, where we only had SSDT, it wasn't possible to actually view display folders. So if you had a table with 1,000 measures, for example, then you would just see all of these measures in this horrible grid. So with no hierarchy, with no display folders, anything like that, and it would just be a nightmare to navigate models of that size. Also, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, Tabular Editor works offline. So basically, you can make all the metadata changes that you want. It's lightning fast. And then when you hit the save button, it'll take a couple of seconds to write those changes back to the Analysis Services engine running underneath of Power BI Desktop. But the point here is that instead of this synchronization happening all the time whenever you make a change, you as the developer is in control of when the synchronization happens. It's only when you hit the save button. Tabular Editor also has a scripting engine, which is kind of nice if you want to automate certain tasks. I will show you a demo later where I'm using the scripting engine to generate measures automatically. But there are many other use cases for scripting, as you will see. There's also something called the Tabular Editor Best Practice Analyzer, which you'll also see. It's just sort of a solution that scans your model metadata in the background all the time and letting you know if you're doing something that's not a best practice from a data modeling perspective. If you are working with Power BI Premium, then you may also be interested in the save to folder functionality, at least for For more advanced scenarios where you have multiple developers working on the same data model simultaneously, then Tabular Editor is able to save the model metadata into a folder structure, which is a much better way of integrating the source code for the model into something like version control, Git, or Azure DevOps, or something like that, if that's what you're planning to do. But that's sort of a more advanced scenario, and I didn't plan on showing you that in this demo. But if time permits, and if you're interested in it, then we can certainly take a quick look at how that works. Yeah, so that's about it for the slides. Oh, that was just one more slide. Yeah, what's the catch? I normally say that Tabular Editor is not well suited for people who are new to tabular modeling. So if you don't have any clue what a measure is, or what the difference is between a measure and a calculated column and so on, well, then Tabular Editor is not really going to help you, because there's no diagram view, there's no DAX IntelliSense, no way of previewing the data in the model, or do processing or data refresh from inside Tabular Editor. And also, of course, being an open source tool on GitHub, there's no 24/7 support. You are, of course, very welcome to post issues to the GitHub issue tracker, and normally I reply within a few hours, at least while I'm awake. But that's sort of the catch of using an open source tool. So of course you will have to decide whether this is something for you or not. My advice normally, if you're new to this stuff, is that you use and familiarize yourself with how data modeling works in Power BI Desktop first, and then once you start to get sufficiently frustrated with some of the the little working on it spinner that pops up once in a while when you're making modeling changes, once you start to get sufficiently frustrated about that, that's the time when you switch to Tabular Editor, so that you can truly appreciate the difference. Yeah, this is just a list of some of the features in the UI. Instead of going through all of these one by one, I think I'll just switch over to my Windows machine, where I will show you the demo. So to start off, what I have here is just a very simple Power BI model, where I already took the liberty of importing some tables. So this is just from the AdventureWorks data model, where we have our fact internet sales here in the middle. We have a product subcategory and so on. We have a customer and a date table. So just a very, very simple data model, nothing fancy. So typically the first thing we want to do after we import the tables in a model like this is we want to create explicit measures. Now I know a lot of people will normally just use the numeric column. So if, for example, we wanted to see the sum of sales amount, many people would just directly drag in the sales amount column and get the result right away. But for a number of reasons, the recommendation is that you always hide the numeric columns and then create explicit measures on top of those columns instead. One of those reasons is that if you just drag in a column like this, you will have to make sure that the default aggregation at least is the correct one, because it could have been that you needed an average or a maximum or a count distinct or something like that. So it may not be the right thing to do always. Another good reason is that if you have users that are going to look at your Power BI dataset using Analyze in Excel, well, then they won't be able to actually browse the model, because the pivot tables in Excel actually requires your model to have explicit measures. So what you should always do instead is you should create a DAX measure that performs the aggregation that needs to be done. So in this case, let's just do something like sum of sales amount, and we can name this sales amount. Hit enter, and there's the working on it spinner, and there we go. Now we have our sales amount measure down here. So let me just, here we go. So, and you can tell by the icon here that this is an explicit measure, whereas this is just a column. So in this case, what you should always do is to make sure that you hide hide the column so that only the measure is showing, and this way you can avoid confusion. So of course, if a model such as this contains many numeric columns that you need to create explicit measures for, then this whole operation starts to get a little bit tedious over time. So instead of doing it manually like I did here, we can use Tabular Editor, and we can actually automate some of this stuff. So if you have Tabular Editor installed, then you can just go to tabularieditor.com, where there's a download button, which will take you to the latest release of Tabular Editor on the GitHub page. If you scroll down past all of the release notes, you will see down here at the bottom there's there are actually two binary files. There's the installer file and the portable version. I recommend you download the installer version because that will automatically register Tabular Editor with Power BI Desktop, whereas the portable version is mostly used for Analysis Services DevOps when you have these CI/CD servers where you want to install various tools. So always download the installer file, install that on your machine, and then at that point you should see Tabular Editor pop up on your external tools tab within Power BI Desktop. So basically what you do here is you click this button, Power BI Desktop will launch Tabular Editor, and you will get this interface here, which is the main interface of Tabular Editor. Some things to be aware of is at the top left corner of the screen, you'll have all of these toggle buttons, and these control which objects are displayed in the model hierarchy here below. So you can toggle these on and off. Just be aware that your preferences here will be saved. So the next time you open Tabular Editor, you will have the same buttons toggled on and off. So for example, if you're wondering why you're not able to see any of the measures in the model, well, then that might be because you have toggled off the measure button here. I can't count the number of times where I accidentally forgot that I've turned this off, and then I did some presentation and I wondered where the heck all my measures were. So it's just to be aware that you can control this stuff here. So basically here you get the metadata representation of your data model shown in a hierarchy, and you'll see it shows you all of the data sources in your model, if there are any. Perspectives, relationships are shown just as a list where the name of the relationship indicates from which table to which table the relationship has been defined. If you have row level security in your model, you'll see those here as well. Shared expressions are for Power Query M queries, which are not loaded into any tables. They will appear here. And then all of your imported tables will show up here. So one thing to be aware about for the external tools integration with Tabular Editor to work seamlessly is that you should always disable the automatic datetime feature in Power BI, because what happens if you don't do that? So you can see here I already disabled the global setting. So whenever I create a new Power BI file, I don't get the automatic datetime feature. But you can see here, if I now go in on my current file and I enable auto datetime, we'll click OK. So something now happens, and we should see over on the Tabular Editor side that now we have a number of these hidden local date tables. And these tables are created and maintained by Power BI. Basically, Power BI Desktop is creating one such table for each of the date columns in our in the tables that we imported. And the best practice when you're doing modeling in Power BI Desktop is that you always provide your own calendar date table, which is what I already have here in the dim date table. So I shouldn't need all of these local date tables. Now the reason is the reason why I recommend that you always turn off the auto date time feature is that I've had some experiences where Tabular Editor sometimes crashes, or sometimes Power BI Desktop crashes when you're making changes to a model through Tabular Editor, when it has these automatically created date tables. So always the recommendation in this case is that you go into Power BI Desktop options. Oh, that's the wrong one. go into the options here and you disable the auto date time. You don't really need it anyway. Just ask the Italian gurus, Marco and Alberto. It's always better to bring your own date table into the model so that you can reuse the same date logic across several fact tables. So,
yeah. That shared experience. I didn't quite catch something about M queries. Was it about orphan M queries?
Shared expressions.
Shared expressions.
Yeah. So in this case, the model that I have here, you'll see that all of my M queries appear under partitions on each of my tables. So we can find the M queries within the table partitions. But the thing is that in Power Query, if I go to transform data, so you can see here we have the Power Query editor and we have one query for each of the tables in the model. But the thing is with Power Query, it's actually possible to define additional queries which are not loaded into the model. So I could disable the load and you'll see the name of this query now appears in italics. In this case, this query will not be loaded into my tabular data model as a separate table. This could be useful if you have some queries that contain some logic that you want to reuse across several tables. Then you disable the load on one of your tables here, and then you are able to reference it from other tables. Now, in general, whenever I'm building data models, I assume that the underlying data source is a SQL-based data warehouse. So there's not really any logic in any of these Power Queries. It just loads the data directly from the source. But of course, in real life, you often have a lot of transformations going on here, reading data from various sources like Excel files or web APIs or whatever. And in that case, the scenario might be a little more complex, and you might have these M expressions which are not loaded to any table. So let's rename this as M expression not used anywhere. Let's apply this change. And now when we go back to Tabular Editor, you can see here that now this M expression shows up here under shared expressions. Since it's not being loaded to any table, it has to appear somewhere, right? And the place it appears is the shared expressions. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. This is the first time I've realized that you can see M in Tabular Editor.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you're learning something then. All right. So the first thing I wanted to show you here is how easy it is to create new measures using Tabular Editor. So we already saw that we could create the sales amount measure over in Power BI Desktop, and of course I can create similar measures for some of the other columns in my model. So measures are one of the features that are actually supported. So you will see if you right-click somewhere. Tabular Editor allows you to create a measure, but it doesn't allow you to create stuff like calculated columns or hierarchies or any of the other modeling objects that are there. And that's because Tabular Editor by default limits the things you can create to only those that are actually supported by the external tools integration. So if you Google Power BI Desktop external tools, and you can see here it says it's still under preview, and then under supported write operations, you'll see that this is what I mentioned earlier, that only a few types of objects can actually be edited, at least in a supported way. And what does it mean that it's supported? Well, it means that even though it may still work if you're editing or adding other kinds of objects to your model, Microsoft support will not be able to help you if something breaks or if your PBIX file stops working or something like that. So for that reason, I highly recommend that you just stick to these kinds of objects that appear here. If you are feeling experimental and you want to see what else is possible and just play around with it, well, then you can always go to File, Preferences, and then here you can see there's this check mark that says Allow Unsupported Power BI Features. If you put a check mark here, then it will unlock the full modeling experience of Tabular Editor, and at this point you get many more options for adding various stuff to the model. But just be aware, if you do that, it's very likely that you will be making some change which is not supported by Power BI Desktop, and that can cause all kinds of issues. So at least for now, I recommend you just leave this checkbox unchecked, which is the default, and then see what you can do with this feature only.
Yeah, but
Okay.
Daniel, if you're connected to Azure AS or Power BI Premium, you can use those, can't you?
Yes, absolutely. So this limitation only applies to editing a model inside Power BI Desktop. So any of the other incarnations of analysis services like Azure AS, Power BI Premium, or even on-premise AS, for those, Tabular Editor won't even restrict you. It'll just allow you to edit any property, even if you have the experimental checkbox here disabled. All right. So I want to show you how we create a measure in Tabular Editor. So basically, you click on the table where you want the measure to reside. You right-click, choose Create New Measure. So first thing you'll notice is that the measure instantly appears in the model hierarchy. So let's give it a name here. Let's call it discount amount. And also notice when we rename it, then there's no working on its bin or anything like that. The rename just happens instantly. And that's, as I said earlier, it's because we're just working with the model metadata. So any change we make is lightning fast. The measure doesn't appear in the Power BI field list yet, but it will as soon as we hit the little save button up here, or we press Control S on our keyboard. But before I do that, I'll just write a DAX expression here for the discount amount. So I'll just put sum. So you'll notice here, unfortunately, there's no intelligence. So you have to know the DAX syntax for writing measures by heart. There's not a lot of help to be gained here. There is a little known feature that if you hover over a DAX function, such as this one, and you click F12, or you hit this button here on the toolbar, navigate to the symbol under the cursor, then Tabular Editor will actually open the dax.guide website and navigate to the function on which the cursor was. So you can use this if you forget the syntax of a function to get a reminder of the parameters and so on, and get some examples of how to use a particular DAX function. So here we wanted to have the sum of discount amount. So instead of typing out discount amount, I'm just going to drag the discount amount column over to the expression editor. And then you'll see Tabular Editor generates the DAX expression that corresponds to this column reference. So just need to close the parentheses here. And then I could, if I like, I can click this button here to format the DAX code using the free DAX formatter service provided by Marco Russo and Alberto, the SQL BI team. So if I click here, I'll see that now I get these nice little space characters put in, and that's sort of the best practice for formatting DAX that's been in here. Of course, this is a very, very simple DAX expression, so the format button doesn't really do a lot of stuff. But you could easily imagine if you had a several line piece of DAX code, it's nice to just being able to hit one button and get it nicely formatted. So at this point, if we hit the save button, because at this point we still haven't actually made any changes to the data model within Power BI Desktop. All the changes we've made are local to Tabular Editor. But once we hit the save button, we'll see that now the field list here in the background have been updated. So now we also see the discount amount measure. And even though it's actually unsupported, we can still go in here and we can hide the column. So what's unsupported here is that columns are not among the objects that we are currently allowed to edit through an external tool. But since whether or not a column is visible is just a simple property, doesn't have anything to do with calculations or anything like that, then I figured I just sneak in that one feature. So technically it's not supported, but the risk of something breaking because of this should be very, very low. So now I just went in and hit the column here just by right-clicking, choosing make visible or make invisible, and you can do this for multiple columns simultaneously by shift or control clicking. So we can hide many columns at once, hitting save, and then we can see the field list updating here to reflect this. The integration is also such that, okay, so discount amount does not have any values, but let's go with sales amount. So if you look at the number here, and if we change something in the DAX expression, for example, if we want to deduct the tax, so we multiply this by 0.9, and we hit save, then we can also see the number updating in real time over in Power BI Desktop. So at this point, you can start to work with some of the more advanced modeling features. Let's say, for example, that for some reason you wanted to create a copy of these two measures. So just select them, and then you can just do regular copy paste operations. So I just hit Control C on my keyboard and then Control V, and I instantly get a copy of these two. And you can repeat this operation and create as many of these as you like. Once again, hitting save. Just like this, I now have tens of measures in my model. And if I make a mistake, well, then of course we have the undo functionality here. So we can go back to the way things looked before we started. We can redo as well. And we can drag and drop these objects. So if we decide that some of these measures should appear on a different table, we can just drag them up here, hit save once again. And now we should have on our product table, we should see some of the measures here as well. And we can even do display folders. So let's say that on our fact table, we wanted to place some of these measures into a new display folder. So we just type discount amounts. And maybe we decide that we want some we want to drag this object out of the folder, or maybe we want to drag them back in, or we want to create subfolders, and then we can drag all of these in here. And then we figured out we made a mistake because sales amount should actually be at the table level instead, so it should look like this. And we hit save, and there we go. Things look good in Power BI Desktop as well. And not only can you copy paste measures and objects between tables, you can actually copy these objects between two instances of Tabular Editor. So let's say, for example, that I have a model, a tabular model hosted on Analysis Services. So here I happen to have an instance of Analysis Services running on my local machine. So here we go. And here's the full AdventureWorks model with all of the various measures and so on. Well, then instead of recreating these measures over in Power BI Desktop, I can actually just go in here and I can copy these measures and then just paste them over here. And then assuming that the underlying tables have the same names as in the model that I copied them from, so that the DAX expression is valid, then I can simply just hit save. So in this case, you can see I get an error here. You can see the little arrow symbol once I hit save. That's because the model where I inserted the measures does not have a table called internet sales. In this model, it's called fact internet sales instead. So that's why I'm getting this error here. In Power BI Desktop, you would see the same behavior with the little exclamation marks here. So of course, this is because the source model. In the source model, the tables have different names, so of course I shouldn't expect the objects the DAX formulas to just work. But I'm sure you can you can clean this up before you start copy pasting, and there could be other scenarios where it may be interesting to copy measures back and forth. So here I'll just press Control Z, undo to get rid of this. Hit save once again. And there we have it. So so a lot of stuff going on here, plenty of stuff we can do. Of course, I mentioned earlier that instead of just creating these measures manually, we can also script the creation of these measures. So let me start all over by first of all deleting all of these measures. So I multi-select, I hit the delete button on my keyboard, and let's make these columns visible once again. Hit save. And of course, now this visual no longer works because this measure that the visual was using no longer exists. So we'll get rid of this. Let me close this one, and here we have the one that's connected. So yeah, so the thing I wanted to show you is that if the situation is that you have many numeric columns that you want to create explicit measures for, then instead of doing it one by one, you can use a script. So if you go to the Tabular Editor GitHub page, you'll see here on the Wiki tab, there's an article here called Useful Script Snippets. Let me zoom in a little bit here. Useful script snippets, and in this article you'll find many different scripts that are useful for some of the more common things that people choose to script. So let me just show you the first example here, creating measures from columns, which is exactly what we want to do. So I copy this snippet. I put it in the advanced scripting tab here. So you'll notice there are two tabs for editing code. One is the expression editor for DAX expressions, and the other one is the scripting tab here. So I don't want to spend a lot of time going over the details of this script, but the main point of this is that you can select any number of columns in Tabular Editor, and then when you run the script, a new measure will be added for each of those columns, where we'll just use the sum. We'll write something like sum of and the column name to use as the name of the measure. And then put in the DAX formula that uses the sum function. We will also apply a format string to the measure and provide a description. And finally, we will hide the base column for which we created the measure. So in this case, if I select a number of columns here, like discount amount, extended amount, freight, sales amount, and tax amount. So now I've selected 5 columns. Now when I run the script, you'll see that I get these 5 measures created instantly, and each of these measures will have the corresponding DAX expression set up. And also, if you look at the name here, you can see it's faded in gray. So the script has also hidden the base columns for this. So when I hit save, we now get the 5 new measures to appear here in Power BI Desktop instead. So that's the advantage of using this script technique, is that you can easily automate repetitive tasks. So instead of creating the measures one by one, you just have the script that you can use. And you can even save this script as something called a custom action in Tabular Editor, which makes it easy to reuse the script the next time you want to run the script. So basically, you hit this button, you provide a name for it. Let's call this Wellington Power BI User Group Demo. And let's put a backslash here, and let's call it create measures from columns. And then down here below, you decide what kind of objects should this script apply to. In this case, measures is not the correct choice. We should choose columns here because we want the action here to be visible whenever we select one or more columns. So I click OK. And now the next time I select a number of columns here and I right click, you will see that now I have this action available here from the UI. So it looks like the script is now an integrated part of Tabular Editor. So if I undo the changes I made before, I can recreate those measures, not by running the script. Now we can get rid of the script. So we only need to do this operation once. And now the next time we select a number of measures and we right click, you can also find the shortcut up here, create measures from columns. Then we just run the script this way, and over time you can sort of imagine that you can have your own repository of scripts that you add to Tabular Editor to just make it easy to do stuff that fits to your workflow. Another example of an interesting script is a way for us to generate time intelligence calculations. So I don't think I have this already, but in the same article as you saw before, There's a number of samples on how to create time intelligence measures. So in many scenarios, you need to create one measure for the year-to-date calculation, one for quarter-to-date, month-to-date, and so on. And of course, if you have 10 base measures and you need to create 10 different versions, time intelligence versions of each of those measures, then you can easily see how that would be a tremendous task to create all of these measures manually. So instead of doing that, there's a script here that you can use. The full script here will actually create a number of different measures. Let's just try to copy that in. So here, this is a large script. The first thing you need to set up here at the top is to specify what's the name of your date table in your model. Because all of these time intelligence calculations require your model to have a calendar table. So in this case, it's not a date. Let me just fix this a little bit. So it's called dim date, and the date column on this table, I believe, is called full dates alternate key. And so basically what this script does, it's going to loop over every measure that I have currently selected. And then for each of those measures, it's going to add one year-to-date calculation, one previous year calculation, year-over-year percentage, and quarter-to-date. And I believe that may also be, here at the bottom, we also have a month-to-date calculation. So basically, let's say I select the 5 base measures that I have. And let's say I now, let's actually, you know what, let's change this a little bit, because I can see by default this script is going to put all of these measures in the same display folder as the existing measures. But sometimes you may want to put the time intelligence measures into a separate folder. So just so you can see how scripting works a little bit, let me create a new variable here at the top, destination folder, and let's call it something like time intelligence. And then I want to get rid of all of these references to the original display folder of each measure. So we can just do a search and replace here. So replace the M display folder with my destination folder. And then we replace all of that. And so now when we run this script, we'll see we have gotten this new folder up here at the top, time intelligence. And if we expand that, you can see here we have our many different flavors of time intelligence measures, one set of measures for each of the base measures that we selected. So here I think I may have already saved you a full day's worth of work if you had to create all of these measures manually in Power BI Desktop. Hopefully you can appreciate that there may be many scenarios where scripting things like this could help you. And I mean the scripting syntax here, it's not that difficult to learn. It's based on C#, but I would say that most people, if they start out by looking at the scripts here in the wiki, it should be pretty self-explanatory what to do, and making small adjustments to the scripts should be something that most people will easily be able to do. If not, if you have a question, if something doesn't work, feel free to post an issue to the GitHub site. I'm always happy to answer questions that help people use the scripting functionality more. That's time intelligence using scripting. Of course, you can probably imagine many other scenarios where scripts can help you improve productivity even more. Let's just hit save here to see what happens. So over in desktop, we should now have our time intelligence folder here, and you'll see it contains all of these measures here. So that also seems to work. So what else? Let me just head back to the slides just to make sure I don't miss anything. Oh yeah. One other feature of Tabular Editor is that it's able to show you a dependency view between the measures in your model. So let me just, as an example, let's create a new measure here, and let's just put some random calculation in this measure where I just use a number of other measures here. It doesn't really matter. Then Tabular Editor has this show dependencies feature. So if you right click on a measure or if you hit F3, then Tabular Editor will be able to show you this dependency tree, so you can view how the entire tree of calculations looks like in both directions. So in this case, I was looking at my new measure, and I can see that new measure depends on sum of sales amount QTD, sum of tax amount, and so on. And sum of sales amount QTD in turn depends on sum of sales amount. And you can go in the other direction as well. So if you start by looking at sum of sales amount, you can see that this measure is also being referenced by all of the time intelligence flavored measures. And in particular, this one is also being used by the year-over-year calculation, which is also being used by the year-over-year percentage. And so this is an easy way to, if you need to get an overview on how what dependencies exist because of the DAX expressions of the measures, then you can use this tool for that.
Is there a way you can export those, Daniel? Like I'd quite like to export those on a globally on a model, so I can then put them into a network visual, so I can visualize that.
Yeah. So what you can do, of course, if you just have a single top-level measure, then you can actually show this dependency tree. And then if you hit Control-C, then you can actually copy this. And you can paste it, and you get it output in this text format. It's not ideal, but if you wanted to have it for every single measure in your model to sort of understand the full dependency tree, then you can do something like that, but you'd have to create a script for it. And now in this case, I don't think I have a standard script here. Hang on. No. So
call the GMV that you're calling in.
Generating documentation, or?
No, so the generating documentation that we have here is mostly for generating to get a list of all of the object properties. So basically just getting a list of all the measures in the model and what their descriptions are, what their format strings are, expressions. This uses a special function called export properties, which makes it very easy to create this list. But unfortunately, it doesn't show you the dependencies between measures. But I noticed there's another one here called export dependencies between tables and measures. Let's say you have a large complex model. So yeah, so this could be a starting point. So let's have a look at this. So let's go in here. So let's, so this is just being run for all of the measures in the model, and then it just outputs the results. So this particular script only shows the dependencies between measures and table. So this is a CSV file I would get if I copied it. If I open it in Excel, it looks a little bit prettier. So you can see discount amount depends on fact and net sales, and some of discount amount year to date depends both on fact and net sales and dim date. But we should be able to easily modify the script so we get not just the table dependencies but also the measure dependencies. So here in this case, we add a row. So you can see we construct a variable here that considers all references of type table. And we can probably if we do something like let's do something like, so this is just going to be a real quick example, but let's do something like this, and let's also output. So here I'm just providing some more information. Measure, let's call this all measure references. This is naturally a little more complex example here, and let's do like this. Let's name this variable m. Oh, we already have that. Let's call it m2. Yeah, so not sure if this works, but let's try. So we got something. Let's copy it to clipboard. Go in Excel. And here we go. So it says that sum of discount amount year to date depends on sum of discount amount, which is a measure, in addition to the to the two tables that it also depends on. So at least this, I think, does the trick. Here in this case, I expanded it so that it'll show the full dependency tree. So not just the direct dependencies, but also the indirect dependencies. So in this case, sum of discount amount year-over-year percentage directly references this measure. But since this measure indirectly references both this and this guy, then we see everything here. So if this is not what you want, if you just want to see the direct references, then we just get rid of the deep call here, because the deep call basically goes in and recursively iterates all of the nested dependencies. So running it once again without the deep, we should get only the direct dependencies. Yeah, now we can see a year-over-year percentage. Now it only references discount amount and discount amount year-over-year, which are the direct dependencies for this guy. Let me just copy this script into the. I don't know. Can you access the chat, or maybe I can send it to you, Phil, and you can distribute it.
Just flick it to me. That's cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
Daniel.
Okay. Let me just put it here. Okay. You can do many things with scripts, and you can probably imagine many other scenarios where scripts may be useful. So if you have an interest in this, I highly recommend that you invest a little time in this. I think I did a presentation at the SQL Bits conference a number of weeks ago, where I did a session on scripting, a deep dive session on scripting, and I think the session was recorded and should be available online in just a short time. So if you have interest in this, I recommend you check out that session, where I go into much more details on how to write these scripts. So let's see what other things do we have here. I think that mostly covers the basic functionality and the scripting functionality of the tool. A couple of other things to be aware about. So if you are working simultaneously in Power BI Desktop and Tabular Editor, so let's say you have a multi-monitor setup where you have a Power BI Desktop on one screen and you have Tabular Editor on the other, then you can actually make changes in both tools at the same time. So now let me just hit save to make sure Power BI Desktop is updated. So now let's say, for example, that we rename the new measure here. So now we use Power BI Desktop to rename an object. So let's call this I don't know, dummy measure, something like that. Then the moment we hit enter, we'll see the little spinner. We will also see that the field list in Tabular Editor has been refreshed, and now it actually says dummy measure here. And this sort of two-way integration between Tabular Editor and Power BI Desktop is possible because we have the detect changes on local AS instance checkbox enabled. This could cause issues in some cases. So let's say, for example, that I make a change here to my dummy measure. Let's say that I change the DAX expression to something like 1, 2, 3. But at this point, I still don't hit the save button. So that's also why you see the little blue question mark here. This indicates that I made a change to the DAX expression on this measure, but I haven't saved my change yet. So Tabular Editor has no way to know if the DAX expression here is still valid. It doesn't actually parse the DAX syntax to see if it's valid code. So in this case, we'd have to save this change before we will be able to see whether or not I have some error in my DAX code. So instead of saving, let's go over here to Power BI, and now let's change this expression to something else. And then you will see what happens is that Tabular Editor gets this dialog saying external change detected. So now the problem is that we have a conflict. So we made a change to an object in Tabular Editor, and then we made a change to the same object in Power BI Desktop before we actually committed or saved the change from Tabular Editor. So we get this warning whether we want to refresh the field list in Tabular Editor based on the change that was made in Power BI Desktop. If we do that, then we are going to lose the change that we created in the change that we made in Power BI Desktop. We can also choose not to update the field list based on this change, but in that case, we risk losing our changes in Power BI Desktop the next time we hit save. So unfortunately, there's no good way to resolve the conflict. So my recommendation is that whenever you have Tabular Editor open, you always make sure to save your changes before you switch back to a Power BI Desktop, because then you can avoid these conflicts. So it's just a matter of habit, I guess. But hopefully over time you will all appreciate Tabular Editor so much, so you will never be going back to Power BI Desktop once you start using Tabular Editor. But we will see. So it's just a little thing to be aware about. So you can see now in this case I click no, so my measure here still retains the original value that I had in Tabular Editor, whereas over in Power BI Desktop it still uses this value. And this means the next time I hit save here, I'm going to get a warning, because Tabular Editor can see that Power BI Desktop, the model in Power BI Desktop is now at a higher version number than the model in Tabular Editor. So it just warns me one more time whether I want to override the changes that were made in Power BI Desktop. So in this case, I hit yes. And now we should see immediately the formula expression up here changes to reflect what I have in Tabular Editor. So it's just a few quirks that you need to be aware about. So I mentioned there are a couple of other things that we can add to our Power BI Desktop model other than measures. The most interesting one of these, I guess, is the calculation groups. So in order to add a calculation group to our model, we go to the tables folder here, and then we choose create new calculation group. And the most common scenario for calculation groups is for doing time intelligence. So just give me 1 second. My daughters just woke up. So I'll just switch over to Danish here for a second. Godmorgen, piger. Ja, jeg sidder og arbejder. Kan I ikke gå ind til mor?
Jeg vil så gerne have dig.
Ja, men jeg sidder lige og arbejder. Ikke? Vær lige sød og gå ind til mor, ikke også, Pia?
Okay, vi leger bare med din robot.
Jamen, det må I gerne. Men så gå ind til mor, ikke også, og luk døren. Tak, Maja. Sorry about that. It's early morning here, and they just woke up. Yeah, calculation groups. One of the most common scenarios for calculation groups is for implementing time intelligence. So you already saw how when we wanted to have time intelligence, we had to create individual measures for each of the various flavors of time intelligence that we wanted to create. Another option is to create, there's this DAX pattern that you can use to create a disconnected table, and then you can have a DAX switch measure that returns one measure or the other, depending on what you have selected on your disconnected table. The point of calculation groups are to make this scenario easier, so that you don't need to create a disconnected table and you don't need to repeat DAX logic across all of your measures. Instead, you can just go in here and define your calculation items. So let's say we have one for year to date, and another one for current period, and another one for, let's say, month to date. And then you can just specify a DAX expression here, which will then be applied to all of your measures in your model. Basically, you can think of the DAX expression here on the calculation items as changing the filter context for which the measures are being evaluated. So for our year-to-date calculation item, we would typically write something like total year-to-date, selected measure. Let me put this in full screen. Selected measure, and then we would put a reference to our date column here. And basically, the way you should read this code is that instead of selected measure, you should just imagine having any of your model measures being substituted here. And this basically allows you to repeat this calculation logic across all of your model measures, so you don't have to have all of the many repetitions of measures as I did here before. Of course, time intelligence is just one possible scenario. You can use calculation groups for many other things, like currency conversions or unit conversions, all that kind of stuff. So now you can see here when I hit save, going back to Power BI Desktop, we get this little warning message up here saying one or more calculation groups need to be manually refreshed. So we hit refresh now, and then you will see that it looks like our new calculation group here it just appears as if it was any other table, and we can even see what the data inside of it looks like. So it just has year to date, current month to date. It also has an ordinal column. So if we wanted to change the display order of these objects, we can just drag them around in here. And this will actually, once we save and we go back to desktop and we refresh again, then this will actually set the ordinal here of the columns, the display order. And now the way it works is that if I combine, so let's say I create some kind of matrix here where I put the let's say I just put the full date alternate key, and I put the fact internet sales sum of sales amount. So now we just get the sales amount by day. But if we now add the calculation group as on the columns level, then you'll see it's still just the sum of sales amount measure, but now we should see that the month to date and year to date values, they sort of accumulate across all of the days. And the cool thing here is that this works regardless of which measure I'm using. So if I'm using freight instead of sales amount, then we now have the same calculation logic applying to freight. So that's the advantage of calculation groups. And as of right now, there are no other ways to create these objects than by using Tabular Editor. Another feature that we have that Tabular Editor unlocks is the perspectives. So perspectives are not directly used in Power BI Desktop, except if you are using the new personalized visuals feature. So if you already enabled this feature under options, and I believe it is somewhere under, let's say, report settings. Yeah, here it is. So we have this personalized visuals preview, allow report readers to personalize visuals to suit their needs. So normally this feature would allow report users to change anything in this visual here. For example, they could change it to a line chart, and they could bring in other measures, other columns for slicing and dicing. But using this, using perspectives, so you can see now we have this button here saying this visual can be personalized by report readers. And if I'm not mistaken, there should be a way here, and I must admit I haven't used this a lot. So there should be a way where we can specify what perspectives we want to use for the personalized visuals feature. Maybe I have to, so I forget where this setting is. Do you happen to remember it, Phil? Where?
No, I don't, sorry. I can't remember.
No, that's fine. So, okay, but the point here is that I can go into Tabular Editor, I can create these perspectives, I can create as many as I want. And then for each perspective, I can decide which objects should be visible for that perspective. So let's say that for the personalized visuals feature, I only want to allow my users to choose between different measures. I don't want them to be able to slice on different columns or anything like that. So just take these 5 measures that I have, and I add them to my new perspective. Let's call this Personalize Visuals 1. And then for Personalize Visuals 2 here, we can let this use some other measures in my model. So show in perspective, Personalize Visuals 2. And if we forget which objects we have in which perspective, we can just use the drop down up here at the top of the screen. So we can, if we choose Personalized Visuals 1, we can see that, okay, we only have these 5 measures visible in this perspective. And for the number 2 here, we just have these measures visible. And then we save this change back to Power BI Desktop. And now I think, okay, so where is this setting? That's a little annoying. Okay, I may be running on an older version of desktop or something like that. Maybe that's why. Yeah, okay, so I'm running on the September release. I think I don't. Maybe I needed to update my my Power BI desktop, but let me just show you here on the Power BI desktop blog, personalized visuals. Oh, hang on, maybe it's a preview feature actually.
I think if you change it to a graph, it may work, because I think table may not work.
Ah, yeah, that could be a good point. So let's change this to a graph. And let's go once again. So yeah, I was expecting something to pop up here when I click the little personalized visuals button. So I'm not sure why that doesn't work.
I think you're just turning it on. You're just enabling it on the visual, aren't you, to say that this one?
Oh, yeah, right.
When it's published to the service, that's when it'll show up as an icon on the service that people can go and change it from a bar chart to a line chart or change it there.
Yeah, that's correct. But still, there should be a place where we can specify what perspectives to use for the personalized visuals thing. And I think, let me see. This was a quite a recent announcement. Let's see. Was that in August? It could have been. Yeah, so here we go. So yeah, so here you can see that in the blog post they're also using a Tabular Editor to get this to work. Oh, okay, so maybe it should be over on the.
You click on the page.
Is it on the page level? All right. Okay. Okay. So I actually thought that this feature was on the individual visuals, which is actually surprising to me. But the point here is that when you select a perspective here, then the visuals on this page will only allow the end user to personalize the visual based on the objects that are visible in that perspective. So yeah, okay, so since it's only available at the page level, I'm actually unsure how useful this is. I think it would have been more interesting if this was an option on the individual visuals on the page. But anyway, now you know the feature is there. And as I said before, perspectives also have some merit if you have users that are browsing your model in Excel. Because your Excel users can choose which perspective they want to connect to. And then, especially if you have a large, complex model, then you can sort of use perspectives to just limit the model to view various subsets of the model. So, for example, if you have a large enterprise model, you can have one HR perspective and another one for sales, another one for logistics, and so on. Of course, just keep in mind that perspectives are not a security feature. It's only just for visually organizing objects in a way so that it's easier to locate different objects on a large model. So I think we're running a little bit out of time here, and I want to leave some time for questions as well. So let me know. Do you see yourself using this tool for various stuff, or do you have any questions? What is your first impression?
It's a very impressive tool. I got a question about the scripting, because that seems very handy. Is there a way you can import? Let's say you've got a set of 10 scripts. Is there a way to like bulk import them on the machine? So the scenario I'm referring here is that usually like when you work for multiple customers, they will provide you with multiple laptops. So you are not using yours environment. You like get the fresh environment every time.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So what you're talking about is the custom actions, whether you can bulk import many scripts so that you just have them have them preloaded into the UI the first time. Yeah, absolutely. So you can see here in this interface, you can see there's a link here, because all of these actions are actually stored in a file in this location. So if I just click this here, you can see this is my local app data. And in here we have this custom actions.json file, which contains all of the scripts that have been saved as a custom action. So you can just basically preload this file on all of the machines where you want these actions to be available, and that's it.
I can just have my JSON file somewhere and just paste it in here, and we'll be on the ready to go.
Yeah, so create it once on one machine, and then copy the JSON file from here and distribute it to everyone else who needs to use the same scripts.
Awesome, thank you.
Anyone else?
Any other questions?
Yeah, go on.
When we install this tabular tool onto our PC, can we install without administrators' rights?
Unfortunately, no, that's not possible. But what you can do is you can download the portable version instead, because the portable version on the release page is just a zip file that you can download and expand, and then you can just go ahead and execute it right away. No administrative permissions needed. Now, unfortunately, when you use the zip file, you will not have the Power BI desktop integration. You will not have the little button up here in the ribbon, because that is something that is placed there by the installer. But you can choose to manually. But again, that would require administrative rights. But actually, in order for this integration to work, what happens is that Tabular Editor, the installer puts this little JSON file here in a location on your machine under program files, common files, Microsoft Shared, and so on. And this is just this is basically just a file that points to the location of Tabular Editor on your machine. So you can probably live without this little button. What you would do instead, so let's say you don't have this button, but you still want to edit your Power BI desktop file. Well, in that case, you just launch Tabular Editor manually. You go to File, Open from Database, and then you on the local instance list here, you just point to your PBIX file. You click OK, and then you're good to go. Now everything works just the same as when you launched Tabular Editor from inside Power BI Desktop. And that is all possible to do without having administrative privileges.
Thank you.
Hey Daniel, quick question. Will you support composite models over analysis services come December?
Yes, I will. But initially, there will probably be it will probably be limited which write operations you can make. But you will certainly be able to load a model, a composite model that has been created in Power BI Desktop. Load that model into Power BI Desktop. Into Tabular Editor, and you can view how it's set up. In that case, you will see some things that look different here. For example, it will not have M partitions. At least not on the proxy tables. Those will be set up in a different way. And you'll still be able to edit measures and so on, like you do today. Hopefully, over time, we will be able to support all the modeling changes so that you will even be able to add new data sources, add tables, and so on. But basically, once you have a composite model, everything that I've shown you today should still work on the composite model.
Thanks.
Daniel, I used Tabular Editor for the second time recently to create a calculation group, but I used the number formatting thing of calculation groups, which I think is an underrated feature. The fact that you can write DAX to dynamically format numbers, and I couldn't do it without Tabular Editor. I tagged you on Twitter. It was just a bit of code that just automatically, if the number was 1 billion, it would automatically prefix it with billion, or if it was 1 million, it would automatically make it show as 1 million. But of course, because it's number formatting, it became numbers. So I found it invaluable for that. I also used the same day to try and do a bulk rename of a whole bunch of measures, all with lots of dependencies. And it worked in Tabular Editor, but it screwed up in Power BI Desktop because some of the visuals got confused as to what they were displaying.
Yeah. So yes, that's a very good point. So the first one you mentioned about the number formatting, yes, it's absolutely correct. You can use format string expressions on calculation items to dynamically format basically all of your measures through the calculation group. By providing here a DAX expression that turns into the format string that you want to use. Now there are some some situations where so yeah, it's a long story basically, but for some kinds of calculation group logic, where for example let's say you do something like you create a division or something like that. And it may change the data type of the calculation. So let's say the selected measure in this case was an integer number, and now we divide by something. For example, if we were making a year-over-year calculation, then what happens is that the data type is going to change from an integer to a floating point value. And now the problem is that once that happens, well, then basically all the measures on your model will have their data type changed from currency or whatever the original data type was into variant. So it's sort of the same thing as if you have a measure with a DAX expression such as let's just do something stupid like this. So the question is, what is the data type on a measure such as this going to look like? Is it going to be an integer or is it going to be a string? Well, obviously it cannot be both at once. And this expression is not evaluated when determining the data type of the measure. So what happens is that the measure is actually going to be of the variant data type. And now, due to a bug in Power BI Desktop, variant data types do not work well with formatting, especially on some kinds of visuals like bar charts and so on. There are some issues with how numbers are formatted. So if you have calculation group logic that causes your measures to decay into the variant data type, well, then you may see this formatting issue across all of your visuals, across all of your measures. And in that case, you can experiment with the format string expression to see if that can help you out. Moreover, the other point you had about, sorry, could you remind me again, what was the other thing you mentioned?
And some of the visuals got confused.
Right.
And so they just displayed the message, I can't display this visual, which was a pain for me because I had lots of conditional formatting on them. So I ended up just reverting and changing it manually.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, the number formatting issue is one thing. Another thing, of course, is that now we have this visual here using the sum of freight measure. Now, what happens if I either delete sum of freight or even if I just rename sum of freight? Well, then I'm afraid that the visual is going to break because Power BI Desktop assumes. So the report canvas is not informed that this measure was renamed. It basically just assumes that the sum of freight measure still exists, and that is why I get this error. So we can go to see details, and then we can see that it still expects a measure called sum of freight. So unfortunately, using the interface that Tabular Editor uses to communicate with Power BI Desktop, there's no way to inform Power BI Desktop that a given measure was renamed or deleted, so that Power BI Desktop can refresh the visuals in the correct way. Hopefully we can change this in the future, but right now it's something that you have to be aware about when you're changing measures. And I believe even just dragging a measure from one table to another can cause the same behavior. So let me put the name back as sum of freight. And now we see if I drag this measure over to a different table and hit save. Oh, hey, this actually worked. Okay, that's funny. So yeah, I think for some types of visuals, this might not work because sometimes I have seen that Power BI Desktop generates a DAX query that contains the fully qualified name of the measure, which would include the table name. And so in that case, if you move the measure from one table to another, then of course the visual is going to break. But it seems that at least for bar charts, we don't have this issue.
And implicit measures would probably break, wouldn't it?
Right, because implicit measures are based on columns. So yeah, for columns it wouldn't work, because for columns you would always have the table name as a qualifier. But then again, it wouldn't really make sense to drag one column from one table to another. There's not really any way we can do that, since the column contains data which belongs to that table. Yeah.
And another really quick one, why in Power BI, this might be a question, why see no undo when you change a measure in Power BI desktop? What I like about your tool is that it's a great place to experiment, because you can hit the undo if you screw something up. But in Power BI desktop, if you change a measure and you've overwritten your previous measure, there's no undo for it.
So are you asking me why there's no undo in Power BI desktop?
Either of you know, Phil or Dan?
I don't know. I don't know if you have any insights, Phil.
I haven't noticed. I think obviously you can undo when you're editing the text inside the measure, but you're talking about when you
commit the
measure,
yeah,
and then you realise it's not the right change. You want to go back to the previous version of it. I haven't actually noticed that. So
I lodged something on the ideas site, but don't get me started on the ideas site.
Add it to the ideas site and write your measures properly to start with.
Yeah. You use Tabular Editor.
Yeah, no,
that's Tabular Editor is actually great for beginners.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Yeah, I think it's time to wrap up here. But I hope you enjoyed the session. And as I said, yeah, feel free to leave any suggestions, feature requests, questions on the GitHub issue tracker. Even though the issue tracker is called issues, it doesn't necessarily have to be any issues. You can post questions as well if you have problems getting a script to work the right way or whatever. Feel free to let me know. So yeah, thanks a lot.
No, well, thank you, Daniel. I really, really appreciate you taking the time out, especially the hour of the day that it is for you, your position on your family. This has been a fantastic intro to what is a very rich and powerful tool. And I know we've only really just scratched the surface with the scripting. We didn't even look at the best practice analyzer. There's just so much. So this has been a perfect introduction. So maybe I might bug you late next year for a more advanced session. But as you say, there is plenty of content around and growing content as well, like that SQL Bits session that you said has been online. So once again, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and hopefully you've got some converts and you'll see a lot more downloads from this part of the world anyway.
Sounds good. Yeah, and
I want to thank the sponsor again, even though we didn't follow through necessarily to get the pizzas, but who was the sponsor of tonight?
Another Daniel. He's just left.
He's left, but yeah, just definitely want to say thank you again for that. But well, you can hang up now, Daniel. I'll stop the recording.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you.
And I look forward to seeing